time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Tensions are continuing to grow as United States officials warn Russia is 70% ready to invade Ukraine, having built up a sizable military force along their borders. Ahead of US President Biden and his German counterpart Olaf Scholz's meeting on Monday, the German Chancellor said that the West was unified in its approach to Russia. However, their attempts to talk it out with the Kremlin have so far failed. Can there be a breakthrough, and what will it take? To discuss the latest developments, I'm joined by Christopher Hartwell, Head of the International Management Institute and Professor of International Business Policy at Saar School of Management and Law. We also connect with Melinda Herring, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Very warm welcome to you both. Thanks so much for joining us today. And well, let's begin with you, Professor Hartwell. First, welcome back to the show. And well, there's been a lot going on recently, recent weeks, days, and US intelligence officials, they've been warning that Russia is very close to invading Ukraine, 70% they say. Would you agree with this number? How do you see the likelihood of this military operation happening?
Well, there's only one person in the world who knows this, and that's Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. So you could say 70%, you could say 80%, you could say 0%. It doesn't really matter. I mean, we have seen a lot of things in the past few weeks that are troubling that we haven't seen before, but this isn't necessarily Putin's modus operandi. You know, he likes to do things with subterfuge. He likes to do his salami tactics. But we've seen kind of a large-scale mobilization. We've seen emptying, basically, of Russia's east in terms of military movement. And we've seen additional logistics, which we haven't seen beforehand. So if I were to hazard a guess, I'd say it's more likely than not, but it still could be some brinksmanship. It still could be saber rattling by Russia. The question still remains, why now? Why Ukraine now? And I don't think anyone has answered that. No one can, again, apart from Putin.
Ms. Herring, well, this is all very nerve-wracking news for Ukrainians. How are they reacting to this mounting military build-up?
So I just got back from Kiev, and the mood there is very weird. There is not as much traffic as normal. I got from the airport to my hotel in record time, but restaurants are full. Some people have gone out to the mountains or to a more protected part of Ukraine, but the Ukrainians I spoke with have said, we're not moving, we will resist. There's a new poll out from the Razumkov Center, which is a reliable, reputable firm, and 45% of Ukrainians told the firm that they will resist with armed force, and I think that number is probably low. So Ukrainians are defiant. They've been at this for 8 years. There's a long history of insurgency in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin knows that, and that's one of the factors that limits his ability to take a big swath of Ukraine.
And well, Professor Hartwell, the Ukrainian president, he seems a bit irked by the US and the global media really highlighting the growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine. And he said that he wants quiet military preparation and quiet diplomacy. Do you think that's possible?
Well, I mean, it's difficult because, as Melinda just said, the mood there is weird. And it seems like you don't want to have kind of the panic. Zelensky is trying to keep morale up, is trying to keep everyone together in the sense that, if something does happen, that we're going to need to draw on everyone, but we don't want to panic beforehand. And like Melinda said, the Ukrainians have been at this for 8 years. I mean, it's been localized to the east of the country, and maybe people in Lviv or in Kiev haven't felt kind of this kind of pain, this foreboding beforehand. And I think Zelensky really wants to forestall that so that it isn't a state of panic. On the other hand, I believe he's also trying to make the point that Ukraine is here and Ukraine is involved, and we are talking about Ukraine. And what we've seen is that Joe Biden and Scholz and other people, Macron, are talking about Russia and the West. And Zelensky is trying to say, well, what about Ukraine? Give us agency, put us front and center, because this is our country. This is going to be our graveyard if this happens.
Well, Ms. Herring, how do you see this? What are the steps that Ukrainians would like to see from their government and the West?
So Chris is right that President Zelensky wants to keep things calm. he's very angry at the United States and the UK because both of those embassies in Kiev they evacuated their families, their non-essential staff. And he's afraid that that's going to trigger panic. And the Zelensky administration has had to prop up the hryvnia, it's the Ukrainian currency. So there's real concern. And President Biden just made what I consider to be really foolish remarks. He said that all American citizens in Ukraine should go home now. I literally just got off the plane from Kiev, and I go there really regularly, and there is no danger whatsoever. If you're going to make a statement like that, you have to back it up with intelligence. So I don't understand why I don't understand why President Biden is ringing a bell right now and saying, get out of Kiev right now. I don't see the danger. And if I were President Zelensky, I would be furious that Biden has shot off his mouth again when there's probably a few more weeks. We're not in the danger zone yet. Most analysts think that if Putin's going to do something, and we don't know what he's going to do, I'd love to talk about the options, but it goes from salami tactics to full-scale land invasion, that we're not talking about that until mid-February, probably February 20th or after.
Then, Ms. Herring, then how do you see the prospects for negotiations? Do you think there is any way to diffuse the tensions right now?
No. I think that negotiations are on life support. We're seeing Macron going between Moscow and Kiev right now. And there is no room, as far as I can tell, for negotiation. We can talk about rearranging the furniture on the Titanic, but I'm sorry, Washington and Moscow fundamentally disagree about the open door policy. This goes back to 2008 in Bucharest. And Ukraine and Georgia were promised that they would be able to join NATO someday, but they were never told when. And so that's called the open door policy. And Russia fundamentally rejects that. Russia says that that Georgia and that no one else should be a member of NATO. And NATO has said, no way. Moscow does not have veto policy over NATO membership. The United States has rejected that. Every single American president has to reject that. So we are at an impasse. There's no cute diplomatic formula that can get around this. There's some small things that we can talk about, but that's not what this is about. This is about who gets to be part of NATO and who doesn't. Russia wants a sphere of influence. It wants states in between it and NATO. It wants Ukraine to remain in its orbit. And it thinks that Ukraine is a small little state that it wants to use and put its feet up under. And it's not a real state. Vladimir Putin has written some essays in the last year that are outrageous. He says, my historical lands sit in Ukraine. Ukraine is a fake country. It is a fake language. And President Zelensky is not a legitimate president.
Professor Hobb, I'm curious to hear how you see this. Ukraine, of course, officially adopted a non-aligned status in 2010, thereby ruling out any future NATO membership bid. But this neutrality clearly did not prevent Putin from invading Ukraine just 4 years later. And Moscow, of course, and President Putin's essays, they've been emphasizing that Russians and Ukrainians are one people. Do you think Putin is going to stop at a NATO neutrality, or will Western nations meeting his demands amount to appeasement?
Yes, it's appeasement. It's plain and simple. Like Melinda said, that we are at an impasse. This is a fundamentally different view of the world that you have from Washington, D.C. and that you have from Moscow. And this is not anything new for Russia. There's been worries of quote-unquote encirclement for 300, 400 years. This is Tsarist policy, this is Soviet policy, and this is Putin's policy. So this is nothing new. There's no way to be able to kind of assuage in Putin's mind that this is going to be the peace that then guarantees Russian security, because Russia has its own national interests, its own ideas about what it's going to do. It goes to Syria, it goes to Mali, it goes to other places in the world, and brings havoc and destruction, of course. But this is what it sees as kind of its national interest, and it sees Ukraine especially as its national interest. Throwing Ukraine to Putin is only going to make the bear hungrier. And like Melinda said, this kind of view of Ukraine of not being a real nation, where does it end? Where do you go next and say, what is the next not real nation? Georgia? Any place in the Caucasus? Any place in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, we've heard that one before, that northern Kazakhstan was mostly Russian, so perhaps ethnicity is the issue there. Where does it end? And it doesn't, it has to end here.
Well, Ms. Herring, US officials have been talking about stronger sanctions and export control. What are the options being discussed right now, and do you think any of these measures are going to work?
I don't think it's enough to deter Vladimir Putin. So you need two things if you're going to deter Vladimir Putin. You need the meanest, nastiest package of sanctions you can put together. And the White House has done that. So on a 1 to 10 point scale, we're at about a 2 or a 3 now. And the new package of sanctions that Biden and the Western allies are considering is more like an 8 or a 9. So it's serious. It will get Vladimir Putin's attention, but there's a problem. Vladimir Putin has $630 billion in reserves. So he can afford this, and he's priced in sanctions. He doesn't like it. He doesn't want more sanctions. And if he can get what he wants without sanctions, he'll do it. But the bottom line is he can afford it if he decides that this is really, really important. So you can't just do sanctions, though. You also have to do deterrence. Here's where I don't think the West has played a very good game. The Biden administration has gradually increased and is starting to send more troops and more defensive material. Great. Send more now. There's not much time left, and we don't have any time to waste. NATO needs to be sending more troops to Eastern Europe as well. We need to do everything we can right now to deter Vladimir Putin, and the Ukrainians need to be doing more. I was horrified when I was in Kiev, and I found out that the Ukrainians haven't done more to fortify the northern border. Ukraine has a very, very long, unprotected border between Ukraine and Russia. It's super long, and it's unprotected, and the Ukrainians need to fortify it as soon as possible.
And Professor Hartwell, of course, the Americans and the Europeans need to come together on this. And while the German Chancellor, who met with President Biden on Monday, he's been facing growing criticism over his seeming reluctance to take a stronger position against Russia's actions. How close or how far apart are the US and Germany in terms of responding to the Kremlin? And do you think they're going to be able to coordinate their views?
Well, I wish I were a little bit more optimistic, like Melinda, in terms of the sanctions going up to 8 or 9, because I would say that the meeting of minds between Scholz and Biden is basically the meeting of two greatest enablers of getting us to where we are right now, Nord Stream 2 and the lack of sanctions on Nord Stream 2. And the continued kind of excuses that have been made, first in the Obama administration, and then now kind of under Biden, for Putin, the lack of the deterrent that has been built up to this point has led us to this kind of position where we are now. Germany has been a major enabler, obviously former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, who is on the board of Gazprom and who is carrying water for the Russians in Germany. I think there is a lot in common between the German approach and the current presidential administration in the United States. I worry that that's where the convergence is going to be, and that when push comes to shove, that Ukraine will get thrown under the bus because it is not as important as other kind of broader European security architecture or energy supplies right here in Europe, and that Ukraine is going to suffer because of that.
And Ms. Herring, would you agree with that view? Do you think that is the fate of Ukraine that we're looking at right now?
I am not betting on the Europeans. I'm betting on the Ukrainians. Like I said before, 45% of Ukrainians say that they're going to fight. And I spent a lot of time reporting in Ukraine over the last 7 years. They will fight. They're resilient. I'm not very impressed with what little they've done right now to harden their borders. But it's not going to be a cakewalk for Vladimir Putin if he decides to invade Ukraine again. The Brits have been very impressive, I will say that. They keep sending more and more material. And I was just in Paris as well. And I think that Paris may be changing its line as well. I think that they are increasingly annoyed at Vladimir Putin, his exploits in Mali and in the Sahel. And I think they're increasingly annoyed at all of the cyber hacking. So hopefully Paris will start. I think Paris is also sending more material and expressing a greater role. And Merkel's gone now. This is Macron's moment to be the leader of Europe. So I hope that he seizes it as well.
Well, I hope we will see that after the French elections, of course. And well, this is where we'll have to end the interview today. That was Christopher Hartwell, Professor at Zoll School of Management and Law, and Melinda Herring, Deputy Director at the Atlantic Council. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.